Hello. I'm going to go through this PowerPoint that I use for our trainings in schools for many years now, and look at how those apply to socio-emotional development. I think one of the biggest areas in early childhood regarding social emotional development is the idea of community helpers, which we have clung to as early childhood professionals from the beginning. However, we've not allowed them to grow and change over time, and so many of us in the field are asking for that to happen. And I've left on the screen here this beautiful quote from Sandra Steingraber, who is an amazing community helper. She's been working to get environmental issues in communities cleaned up. She's written about how environmental issues actually create and have a causal relationship to learning issues in children, and those directly impact social emotional development. So I like quoting her for that reason. If you want to learn more about her, she's pretty easy to find if you do a Google search. So be sure to look her up if you're interested in her work, especially about how environmental issues create, varied learning and social emotional development issues for kids. So I'm going to go on. And Sandra Steingraber is part of a collection of portraits from a series called Americans Who Tell the Truth. That's AWTT here. This is from a training about that project. And basically, it asks, are we wanting to construct our identities from complex truths or for easy and flattering untruths? So that's really at the heart of this conversation about reimagining community helpers. How are we working with identity, which is at the core of all social emotional development and should be our number one priority. So when I go through this, I'm going to look at goals, areas of growth, where to begin, and what's next. So when you fill out your form for the class, for your reflection, if you would, after seeing this and thinking about it, create some goals for yourself. It can be just one or two, that's fine. List where you think your areas of growth are. Where do you know you need to find out more and understand more? And then decide on a beginning. Decide where you want to start and what would come next. So let's go through this together, and you can consider those. And if you need my help, of course, you can always get my help. Okay, so let's look at how community helpers have been defined in early childhood settings for many, 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 many years. What are the traditionally held roles of community helpers? So not just who are they and how are they represented, but what are the roles that we've traditionally identified? So here's the classic early childhood community helpers collection. Over the years, it has evolved to include other people that aren't that don't all look like one another. I guess is how I would say it. So we can look at this and see there are some evolutions that have occurred. So that's good. However, we can also see that the roles have pretty much remained the same. I guess this is a farmer, to be honest with you. The only reason I think that is because this person is holding a pig. So again, this is what we do though. What is this person representing? How are they represented? And what happens for kids when these are the people in their neighborhood, so to speak? In your block area is usually where these folks show up. And how can we both expand the representation so that every surgeon is not a white guy, and every teacher is not a white woman, and so on? How can we mix this up? And then the part 2 of this is, how can we expand who qualifies as a community helper? So those are our 2 big dilemmas. So what are our goals here? We're going to redefine community in an early childhood setting and redefine helpers in an early childhood setting in order to accomplish that goal of both expanding the types of roles and expanding our view of who exists in those roles. And a really great, I'm going to include in the class this week, a videotape called How to Outsmart Your Bias. And that's a really helpful one in terms of rethinking who we see in certain roles. So what if we looked at something called beloved community as a way to define a community helper? This is the definition of beloved community, and that those 2 words being used this way originated with Dr. King. So it would only make sense to turn to Dr. King for the definition. So this is a powerful definition. If our definition of beloved community and community helpers is this, so what does that do to who we imagine in those roles and how we imagine them? And, here's another definition from Dr. King. These are all definitions and quotes that I use in the workshop. So I'm just going to go through those. You can look at them on the PowerPoint. Definitely, they're really good, but because you're not in the training, we won't be using them for the class purposes. So what I want to do is look at how these truth tellers from the Americans Who Tell the Truth series embody beloved community, and how do they help so everyone can be safe and have what they need? And how did they change the job chart? How did they have repair conversations? So that those are items that are referred to in the Woke Kindergarten piece, so you can reference those there. So you can go in here and see a link to the portrait gallery if you want to go in and look at all of them. There are over 300 now, so you're more than welcome to go through them. There are some really good ones I've identified for early childhood classrooms, and so you don't have to read through, the many portrait biographies there. So not to worry, but you may want to go in and look at it. And what happens when we expand our knowledge about the helpers in our communities, and how do we get there? So I have something called these 4 squares of power that I use to help us identify these folks. So here is a local truth teller and community helper, Lucille Elmer Allen. You can look her up. She's very well known in Louisville. She's being honored all the time and so on. She was the first woman who identified as a chemist, and she worked for Brown-Forman. She's a Black woman who was a chemist, but she's gone on to do all kinds of work in the community as well as that. So there's an example of someone who should be, every child in Louisville should know her as a community helper. And yet probably they don't. So that's, I like using her as an example because she has so much to offer. And also remember that community members are not always humans. Our beloved community includes the natural world. And we can go back to Sandra Steingraber, excuse me, and think what we love, we must protect. That's what love means. And how many of these sentient beings that are part of our community, the plants, the animals, the clouds, the sky, how many of them can children name? So this can be a wonderful way to teach community and ecosystems. When building a nest, there's no job chart. It's an ecosystem. So this is, again, referring to shifting the way we see community and think about it. So Dr. Monique Liston is a friend of mine. She's an amazing educator. If you Google her, you'll find out she's incredible. She says if there's going to be change, everyone's going to have to change, which I so appreciate about her. She's amazing. So I recommend that you check her out. She has an organization called Ubuntu Evaluation and Education, and it's just, they do amazing work. And what they suggest is we review, reflect, recognize, revisit, and reorganize our thinking. So I like that process. So I'm going to take us through it a little bit. Here's a review. What have we thought before? We've done that. We can reflect on that. And we look at beloved community and seek and find it and show up for it. So here's a really great activity you can do, and that's to look at this father-daughter Candyland dance invitation and say what Mara Sapin-Shavin said. It's disappointing that Jamesville Do It has not rethought exclusionary activities and language. It's made more offensive by "everyone is invited" tagline, as though maybe, just maybe, someone realized the problem and said, let's add "everyone is invited" and that will take care of it. So this is something that we have to think about, the things that go home to families and the homes of the children who are with us. And we would like to think we would never create an invitation like this or add "everyone's invited" to make it seem inclusive. But we send these messages all the time about community. And so what I do in my workshop is I challenge my participants to say, how would you redesign this? What problems occur in it? They're pretty obvious to us when we look at it like this, but do we look at everything with this kind of critical eye? So that's what I want you to start thinking about. I like this, to think about people who are introverted versus extroverted and make sure that we've included everyone and their choice about how to participate. Here is a story of a young woman who began as a twin and was identified as a boy. And this quote is from her. She's now a really apparently well-known TV personality or movie personality, I'm not sure which, but when she was born, she was identified as a boy, but felt she was a girl, and her twin brother at age 4 said, "No, you're wrong. My twin is a girl, not a boy." It's a very interesting story, and they're part of the Truth Tellers series. And what they remind us of in terms of community is, how we are using language around boys and girls, and how we may want to try to stop saying, okay, boys and girls do this, or boys do this, girls do that. Maybe changing our language so that we're not separating out boys and girls. And in terms of identity and social emotional growth and development, this is huge for you as new teachers. This will be something that we will be looking at more and more, about how to change our language in terms of identity. And this one is a big one. So I want you to think about that. You may have some goals around that, some areas of growth around that you want to participate in. And there are lots of great children's books about this. And there are many children I know who had issues that were identified when they were very young in preschool, and now they are in high school, and they have transitioned. Every single one of them that has transitioned from identifying as male to female or female to male have said, when I was a young child, I knew something was wrong and I had resulting behaviors, and they thought that there was something wrong with me in terms of my behaviors. But what was really going on was this gender identity crisis inside of me. So this is not to say we start interrogating kids or we start, we are not qualified to deal with that. However, we are obligated and responsible in terms of understanding that the less we impose these boy-girl identities, let alone all the socialization of what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl, that's a whole other topic. But I want you to really think about this identity issue in this realm. It's so important right now. And here's another identity that is really important to think about. It's named whiteness, right? So it's an idea. It's not that you're white. And this perception that whiteness works for white people is what I would call a pernicious idea. It's persisted throughout history and defined us in ways that we should shift. So what ideas created this category of whiteness historically? How did white people come to identify themselves as white, and what does it mean? And this is really important for young children, that we're looking at how white children are identifying who they see, who they don't see, what they believe, what they're taught to believe, and then what happens when they hear at home one thing and they hear at school another, and that we understand that that's true and okay. So this is just another identity question that we need to work with. I love this quote. But this idea of having a code is really important in terms of social emotional growth and identity. What are the codes that children are grappling with and engaging in? And I like this, that we can, we often isolate for kids. You should be grateful for what you have, right? In terms of your identity, you should be a grateful person. You should be grateful, polite, all those things. But it's okay to be both. You can be sad and thankful at the same time. That it's possible for a child to grow into gratitude in terms of their identity, and their social emotional growth. It's important we let them grow into gratitude, into politeness, rather than expecting it to emerge at a very young age. Yeah, and this is like, do I even need to say anything about this? So when you're talking about social emotional growth, let's model this for children. That, pick your battles. Nope, that's too many battles. Put some battles back. So all of these are areas around social emotional growth and, in some cases, identity. So let's recognize, what if the desired outcome in our schools was wellness? Who would be the community helpers? Who would be the people that we consider the helpers and supporters of wellness for everyone in a community? Would they still be all the people in that picture? I think so. However, there would be a lot of people missing, right? So that's a super important thing. So I'm going to go through the woke kindergarten piece now and understand, help you understand a little bit about them. There's a separate PowerPoint on this, but I'm just going to reiterate a couple of things. Oops, sorry. First of all, I want each of you to know the history of the word woke as it's being used, especially by woke kindergarten, but there's a lot of misunderstanding of how that word is used and what it actually has to do with. So I encourage you to look into the history of the use of it and what it actually is referencing. And one of the basic beliefs around that is communities keep one another safe. So, the terminology arose out of a time when people were not considered safe in terms of their lives being threatened. So that is the foundation for this whole process that we've looked at. If you've gone over woke kindergarten, you already know about these check-in buddies, the check-in cards, and ways of creating flavor jars and playful choices. All of this is in the other PowerPoint, so I'm just kind of reviewing it here, discussing the why, how you can support accountability and repair conversations. Those are really important to learn about for social emotional growth. So what would our classrooms look like if we redesigned the job chart and what it looks like to be a good helper? What would that actually look like? How would we create an ecosystem so there's a sense of shared responsibility and roles instead of you do this job, you do this job, you do this job? How do we make this more of a holistic approach? And again, this is just a review from that particular PowerPoint. I wanted to tell you about this book, Box of Texts. It's really fantastic, and I recommend it's at the public library. It's a really good one for this idea that I'm going to introduce you to, called Solutionaries. So what I try to teach young children and now college students is the idea that you can be a solutionary. And I would suggest that that would be a vocabulary word you can introduce. How can you be someone who's looking for solutions and helping to make solutions? And this goes back to this ecosystem idea. So here's a simple process. You would not do this. You could do it with older kids, like 4 or 5-year-olds maybe, but it's a process you can just make a habit of mind when you're describing somebody to them that's a community helper. You can first say, I have people draw on a piece of paper 4 squares, by the way. So box 1 on the paper is what and whom do I care about? So if I'm teaching you about, say, Sandra Steingraber, who, since we talked about her, what did she care about? Who did she care about? That's an easy answer, right? Box 2, what does she like to do and what does she do well? Well, she was really good at writing and researching scientific material. So she cared about people and the environment and kids and what was really causing their problems. And what did she do? She liked to write and she liked to do scientific research. And who were the people in her beloved community? Who were the people that helped her? So this is an important part of these community helper stories that really often gets left out, so that kids can come to the conclusion that people rose to the occasion as a community helper on their own without any support from anyone else. And this makes it out of reach for them. What we need to start teaching when we talk about social emotional development is that you can't do this without each other. You've got to find ways to get along together, even when it's hard, even when it's hurtful, even when it requires a repair conversation. So who are the people in this beloved community? Well, Sandra Steingraber had so many people supporting her. So, you would talk about that. And then the last box is, so what did she do? So then you would talk about what the person did. This is a great paradigm for kids to understand how people help their communities, right? So just to review it, what and who did the person care about? What did they like to do and do well? Who were the people around them that supported them in their way of helping? And so what did they do with those people? What did they do with their gifts? You can use, anyone can be a community helper now. This could be an artist. It could be a writer. It could be someone who's good at speech making. It can be any number of things. But it invites everyone into this role of community helper. And, I just particularly love that quote. Another thing in social emotional development we have to be willing to do is examine our own tough topics. And this involves looking into the things that are hard for us. I'm going to include, some of you already know about Anastasia Higginbotham's books, but they're a really good resource for tough topics. And I'll include those in this particular look at social emotional development. A lot of our own social emotional development is really what's at stake when we're thinking about how we want to inform children about their own development, how we want to make sure that it's happening in a healthy way. And I think that in terms of reimagining community helpers, we have got to address the issue of how we represent skin color in terms of artistic materials and supplies, which we will talk about in our arts in early childhood section, but this is a mandate. We've got to reimagine this and really look at these stories of community helpers. The last thing I want to say about these community helpers is that something we've got to think about in early childhood that is addressed. Actually, Sesame Street has something on this in terms of incarceration and the way children see, in particular, the police. This is a very sensitive topic. Many people have police officers in their family or have friends that are police officers. And it's a very hot, sensitive, tough topic, but it needs discussion because we have to acknowledge in early childhood that not all young children have experienced the police in the same way. So rather than evaluate and judge the experience they've had as good, bad, or terrible, or horrible, or, place judgment on it, let's pull ourselves out of those disagreements if we need to. And instead of getting bogged down in that battle, remember, pick your battles. What I want you to think about is the reality of young children not experiencing the police in the same way. Naturally, they've not experienced any of these people in the same way, for that matter. However, if Sesame Street has a whole program on this, we know, and it's, by the way, it's many, many, many years old. It's not new. They were ahead of the game. They were looking at this a long time ago. So I really want us to be familiar with that and be honest with young children about, does everyone see this person as a helper? Even a teacher may not be perceived as a helper, depending on the experience the child has had. So just be mindful of that in particular, though, in this area. It's an important conversation that we need to have. And to not acknowledge that young children are experiencing individuals in a very different way really presents a hindrance to their social emotional development.